It's Monday. How you doing, guys? Dr. Thompson here with Exemplify Health Center, your Wellness Way affiliate right here in Yorkville, Illinois. Happy Monday. Hope you guys had a great weekend. In Illinois, we're having absolutely fantastic weather. So I actually put up Christmas lights outside. Somebody actually said, "How dare you?" It's not even Thanksgiving. So they said, "How dare you? How could you put up Christmas lights?" And I thought, well, sorry, I got some guys walking in right now. And I said, you know what? I don't have to turn them on, but it's nice weather, so I wanted to put up the Christmas lights and get them ready because this year it's going to be epic outside. So we're going to have some beautiful Christmas lights. Maybe I'll show you once I have all of those up. And I officially turned them on, hopefully to find them all work and not pull the old Clark Griswold where he puts them all up and none of it works. All right. So I'm talking about this. I know I was going to talk about this last week, but I'm going to talk about it this week instead because I had some things that I wanted to talk about first that I went over last week. So guys, good to see all of you guys that are jumping on right now. How you doing? Barb? Hopefully I can get you guys. Katie, how are you doing? Lisa, thank you for joining us. Amanda, it's good to see you. Tangi, hopefully I pronounced that correct. I apologize. Michael, how you doing? Heather, good to see you guys. So I'm going to talk to you guys about, will the holidays lead you to diabetes? Now, there's a lot of confusion because there's different types of diabetes. I'm going to talk about type 2 diabetes, by far the most common thing. Type 1 diabetes is actually an autoimmune reaction that is taking place. And that's kind of a little bit different perspective. But we are going to be talking about autoimmunity on a webinar coming up on the, it's whatever, the 17th. So a week from tomorrow. So a week from tomorrow, we're going to have an autoimmune webinar. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be, I think, at 8 o'clock. So we're going to talk about autoimmunity. Yes, that does involve type 1 diabetes. But let's talk about the type 2 diabetes. And I know that we're going into the holiday season, and I know that maybe some of you have already doused yourself with tons of Halloween candy. And, already started the process of leading to poor blood sugar control because, this is the time of the year where stress levels go up, which affects blood sugar. And then also all of the different types of foods and snacks and cookies and whatnot that can also cause a lot of issues when it comes to having blood sugar control. And you see that I have the famous Wilford Brimley, who was the spokesperson for type 2 diabetes. If you ever saw those commercials, I kind of rolled my eyes because, guys, I'm going to show you that the proper medical management of type 2 diabetes is absolutely awful. All right, now because I want to let you know that yes, you can in fact start to reverse type 2 diabetes. It is not super hard to do, but it's going to take a little bit of a different perspective. All right, and one of the biggest things when it comes to type 2 diabetes, you got to understand this, guys, is that this is 100% lifestyle. And so if you have type 2 diabetes, it doesn't mean that you got poor genetics. What it means is that you have done this to yourself. And that should be really, really good news. The reason why it's great news is because you have 100% say in, number one, if you want to develop it, but if you have developed it, you have 100% say in how you can heal from it. I'm going to tell you something, that type 2 diabetes is not an illness, it's an injury, okay? What I mean by that is it's just a constant injury. And so the first thing you have to do is to stop injuring it, all right? So if you can actually stop injuring it, you can start to recover and you can start to heal. The reason why I want to talk to you about this, because guys, you're coming into the holiday season, and this is actually, if you think about the holidays, people typically are going to clump all of these holidays, and if you add all of the days together, when it comes to, Halloween until, a week after New Year's, and you take that, and then you take, July 4th weekend, Memorial Day weekend, your birthday, your spouse's birthday, your kids' birthdays, your anniversaries, your Labor Day, Easter, Thanksgiving. You look at all of those different things, look at all these different holidays that we're trying to distract ourselves. It can easily come up to about 25% of your life that you are spent celebrating. Now, I'm all for celebrating, excuse me, but we should actually celebrate responsibly. I'm going to show you why at the very end. So let's talk about diabetes a little bit. And guys, if you're watching this, you know someone's got poor blood sugar control, forward this to them, just tag them, or share this on your timeline, because I'm actually going to show you how the medical thinking, actually I disagree with it 100%. The whole medical thinking about the quote unquote the treatment and the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. The reason why I say, hey, congratulations, you have diabetes is because I have people who come to me and who said, you know, last year I wasn't a diabetic. This year, though, my doctor did some tests and said that I was type 2 diabetic. He never told me, he or she never told me if I was leading up to it or not. And so there's so many people who just think that type 2 diabetes is just a flip that gets switched, meaning I'm not diabetic, now I am diabetic, but the reality is that it's a continuum. And so the problem why so many people are surprised that they have type 2 diabetes is because the doctor that's in charge of their care has never done the proper testing to actually tell them, hey, you are heading down a bad path and you are, you know, having poor blood sugar control, moving into prediabetes, and then finally leading into type 2 diabetes. And just remember that type 2 diabetes is they measure it based off of things like A1C, or they really just, it starts to flag if their blood sugars are actually elevated, okay? It means that you are losing proper blood sugar control. So when you actually look at this is actually what doctors do quite a bit. So hey, I go to my yearly physical, they're gonna pull just some basic numbers. One of them is gonna be blood sugar, and as long as that blood sugar is, you know, under 105 or 110, I think 110 is when it gets flagged. But as long as it's underneath that, then typically, you know, I'm not a type 2 diabetic and I'm doing fine. The reality is though, is that the first thing with blood sugar is that your blood sugar literally is just a snapshot. It's a quick snapshot of where you're at when you're fasting, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. Because listen, you can, if you've been fasting and your blood sugars are elevated, yes, it can mean that you're type 2 diabetic. But the other thing is too, is it also can show is if you are extremely stressed, you know, and you had a really bad morning and then you had to go get a fasting, you know, blood test. Just the stress levels alone can be elevating your blood sugar. So it doesn't really tell you a whole heck of a lot. So really just doctors are just measuring it every single year, and they're saying you're fine until you actually go over a certain number. But let me tell you something, is that if you actually are doing proper testing, you can look at someone and say, all right, based off of doing the proper testing, you in fact are becoming pre-diabetic or moving into type 2 diabetes, or hey, you're losing some blood sugar control. And so that's why this next test is usually what they don't do is this starts to get bad. Then they'll move into what's known as A1C. And A1C is actually measuring your 90-day blood sugar average by actually measuring how much the red blood cells have been degraded. Because remember, insulin will damage the soft tissues, which is why people with type 2 diabetes, why they always have bad joints, stiff joints, joint replacements, and things like that. Because yes, it does in fact damage the soft tissues, and yes, your red blood cells are considered soft tissues. So A1C really is looking at, it's going to be more accurate because it's looking at, hey, where has your blood sugars actually been over the last 90 days versus just a quick snapshot with it. I think what a test is that's even better is actually looking at your insulin levels, okay? There's a couple of ways that you can go with this, but here's the thing, is that when you look at insulin, this whole idea behind insulin, I'm really fascinated with this, and I hope you are too. I hope this really fascinates you. But when you think of insulin, it's like anytime that you are stressed or anytime that you consume sugar and the blood sugar goes up, then you're going to need a hormone response called insulin. It's produced by the beta cells of the pancreas, and they're released into the blood. And then that insulin can actually attach onto cells. It opens up the receptors, allow blood sugar to be able to go into the cells, specifically organs and muscles and things like that. And so the thing is you remember I said receptors. You have receptors that then respond to insulin, okay? Now, the thing is that if you are constantly dousing yourself with so much sugar, which then you need an appropriate response of insulin, and if that cycle just continues to happen over and over and over and over and over, remember your body's always going to adapt to that. And so it will also adapt to its sensitivity to the hormone insulin, which means this, is that the more sugar you douse your body in, the more insulin that you are actually releasing, it also means the more insulin you're going to need to release by your pancreas in order to try to get your blood sugar down, because those receptors become less sensitive to that insulin. which means that if you are actually measuring this and you're seeing that your insulin is creeping up to 11 to 12 to 20 to 24, and even if you still have normal blood sugar, what that means is that you are losing insulin sensitivity, which means your body has to release more and more of it just to get it to actually respond, to try to keep your blood sugars within this normal range. So this is why actually one of the most important ones is actually looking at your insulin levels, because it can tell you if you are on your way to becoming a type 2 diabetic. So if you have normal blood sugar, you have normal A1C, but your insulin levels are sky high, it means that, all right, you're not diabetic, but your lifestyle is leading you down a path that you will have it, obviously, at some point. And this just goes to show when it comes to medicine and things like that. I always ask people, I was like, well, would you want to know if you are building diabetes? Would you want to know if you're building cancer? Would you want to know if you're building heart disease? Would you want to know if you're building, some kind of disease process inside the body? Would you know if you're building, or do you just want to wait until you have it? And a lot of people say, I would want to know if it's building or not. And that's why if you're properly getting the right testing, you can actually see if you are heading towards a very bad path. And that way it gives you an opportunity to be able to fix it before you actually have this injury known as type 2 diabetes, okay? So here's what they do. First thing is your blood sugars are elevated. And they say, okay, let's go ahead and let's do A1C. And they do that, and then it actually goes above, I think, with pre-diabetes is considered 5.6, 5.7, right around there. Type 2 diabetic, I think, is 6.3, 6.4. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty close with it. And so then they're going to measure that, and that will give its definitive diagnosis if someone has type 1 or type 2 diabetes or not. Okay, so the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to give you metformin. Okay. Now, you don't have to look very far to know that metformin has fallen under some disfavor just because of all of the nasty side effects, including recently, I think it was cancer, an increased cancer risk and things like that. But the whole idea behind metformin, why they give people metformin, is because it will help to increase insulin sensitivity, okay? So now they're saying, okay, well, if we give you this metformin, it's gonna make you more sensitive to insulin, so it will help you to lower your blood sugar because those sugars will be able to get inside of the fat cells or inside of your cells to use for energy production, okay? Now, there's a lot of side effects with metformin. I'm gonna actually show you something that's actually better without any side effects, but they start to do that. In fact, a lot of people, they'll see that their blood sugars get lower. You'll see that they actually lose weight too. You increase insulin sensitivity, you will lose weight. And they're like, this is a miracle drug. But the problem is they've never changed anything with lifestyle. And so that pancreas is still required to keep pumping out a lot of insulin. And so the next thing that'll happen, because at some point that's not going to work anymore, and then they'll start to add some drugs in to try to increase insulin production from your pancreas. So that pancreas is just spitting out so much insulin, and then they're going to say, hey, pancreas, I need you to work even harder. So then it forces the pancreas to even work harder, and you guessed it, if you keep asking an organ to work harder and harder and harder, it's going to get to the point where it can't keep up anymore, and you're going to have what's known as pancreatic fatigue, okay? So you're going to have pancreatic fatigue, which means those cells are worn out, and they will not be able to produce insulin. And I've even had several patients who have just the proper medical management have gotten to that point where now they actually have to inject insulin into their bodies to try to bring down their blood sugars so much. And it is a lot of insulin because even the pancreas can't keep up with the demand and the lack of insulin sensitivity that's happened. So then they have to inject insulin every single day to try to keep their blood sugars down. Here's an interesting thought. As I talked to a pharmacist, and he deals with people like this all the time. And he said the next health crisis that is going to take place is actually, because when you look at it and you see the number of people who are pre-diabetic, who are insulin resistant, who are just rounding the curve headed towards type 2 diabetes, he said by 2030 is the biggest drug shortage that's going to be out there right now is insulin. They will not be able to keep up with producing insulin or making insulin and giving it to people, and you're going to see the price of insulin go absolutely sky high. And in fact, it's going to go so high that the only people who are going to be able to afford it are going to be people with money, the rich people. And so he says, because there's going to be so many type 2 diabetics and there's going to be a shortage of insulin, how are they going to be able to get it to everyone? The reality is that they're not. So guys, consider this your warning sign. Start fixing it now versus getting to the point where you have to be on some kind of insulin in order to try to drive down those blood sugars as well. Now, a lot of people, when they get to this point, yes, they can recover, but it's very hard. It's very difficult for them because they have had such a long history of poor behavior that they literally have to become a different person. They have to completely flip their mindset and not be the person that got them in that situation in the first place. So remember, mindset is always going to be key, okay? So here is, when you look at this, I'm going to give you a comparison of why I think that this thing right here, the traditional medical management of it, is so absolutely backwards and crazy. And to help prove that point, I'm going to give you a kind of a parallel with this. But instead of using insulin and using sugar, let's use smoking and nicotine instead, okay? So let's say that you started smoking 20 years ago. So 20 years ago you started smoking. I don't know why you would want to start smoking, but let's just say that you did. Back in the 1950s, that was the cool thing to do. But let's say that you started smoking, all right? And remember, like with nicotine, you have these nicotine receptors in the brain, and you smoke one cigarette, and my goodness, these nicotine receptors are so sensitive to nicotine that literally one cigarette gives you a quote-unquote buzz. That's it. One cigarette, all it takes, you're good. But again, it's no different than any kind of hormone, just like insulin, is you're going to see in the presence of it, those receptors are going to do what's known as down-regulate. They down-regulate, which means now you can smoke 2 cigarettes. Now you need 4. Pretty soon you're up to a whole entire pack of cigarettes in order to get that same hormonal response, especially in the brain. So, this concerns you. You're like, hey, I'm smoking up to a pack a day and I'm not getting the buzz I used to. So you go to the doctor and you're like, hey, listen, I'm not responding to nicotine anymore. And so the doctor looks at you and says, well, if you're smoking a pack a day, you're probably nicotine resistant. Okay, so here's what our plan is, all right? So instead of giving metformin for type 2 diabetes, instead, what they do when it comes to cigarettes is they say, you know what, let's just try to increase your sensitivity to it a little bit more. What I want you to do is I just want you to smoke on an empty stomach, all right? So that way it's just everything's going to absorb a whole heck of a lot faster, a whole heck of a lot easier, and then it probably won't take as much in order to get you buzzed. So you start smoking only when you have an empty stomach and you're like, this works, this is awesome, this is great, problem solved. But then that stops working too. And so now what happens is you go back and you say, you know what, smoking on an empty stomach doesn't help anymore. So what do I need to do now, doc? And the doc says, well, the only thing I guess you need to do is just go up from 1 pack and just go up to 2 packs. So 2 packs a day, and you will have the appropriate nicotine response from doing that. And then, that works for a couple of years, and now you're up to 2 packs, and you're like, this isn't working either. And then the doctor says, well, I guess we can confirm your diagnosis of you being completely nicotine resistant. So I guess what we need to do is we're just going to hook you up to a constant stream of nicotine. So roll up your sleeve. You can carry around an IV bag with nicotine. We'll just start mega dosing you of nicotine. But that's really like what they do when it comes to diabetes. It's just more insulin, more insulin, more insulin, more insulin, more insulin, more insulin, and they're measuring the wrong thing. So obviously, guys, if you understand that analogy, you can see that it's absolutely nuts. It's absolutely crazy. You're like, why would you do that? Because I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer the question. If someone, I'm not saying that this is actually good to be smoking, but if someone was saying, I'm not getting the same buzz from smoking, what would you, using common sense, what would you tell them to do? Chances are you would say, you know what? Maybe if you actually just stop smoking for a while and you let those receptors start to regrow and resensitize, then probably you could get down to having 1 cigarette a day and you probably would be good. And so if you understood, if you actually withdrew from it, then you would understand that, yeah, that would actually start to resensitize your receptors for nicotine, okay? So that's no different when it comes to being more responsive and being more receptive to that hormonal response known as insulin, okay? So here's a different perspective. This is the Wellness Ways approach. And in fact, this fascinates me so much. I actually, really wrote a book about, dedicated out of the book about 2 or 3 chapters about insulin resistance and things like that. So let's give you a different perspective rather than the current thinking. Because the thing is, guys, is that if the current level of thinking is not working, then you have to start thinking differently. You can't have the same plan that is leading people into a diabetes crisis by 2030. So you need to start doing things differently, and you actually have to do it. Not just something that's just because it's different, it's because it works. And so it not only does it work, but yes, it is a different perspective. So how do we handle this? Okay, so how do we handle this whole idea with type 2 diabetes? Number one, the first thing you have to do is you have to start decreasing inflammation. You're going to know with people with blood sugar issues, man, they have a lot of chronic inflammation that is taking place. So first, you have to start handling some of these inflammatory issues that are taking place. That's why things like food allergies are so important. So actually looking at certain cardiometabolic numbers, why it's so important, that can show how inflamed the body actually is. So the first thing is you got to decrease the inflammation. Number two, you got to start resensitizing your cells to insulin. So you got to resensitize the cells to insulin. So what do you think the biggest thing that you can do in order to resensitize the cells to insulin are? Biggest thing that you can do is withdraw, just like you would off of cigarettes, withdraw off of things that are causing an insulin response. And guys, the things that are causing the biggest insulin response are going to be very simple, rapidly absorbed carbs that are getting into the bloodstream really quickly. So I want you to think things like grains, okay? I want you to think things like high fructose corn syrup. I want you to think of white sugar. I want you to think of milk sugar. I want you to think of any kind of carb that's rapidly absorbed and broken down and digested very quickly that can then cause these spikes within the blood sugar. Now, notice I didn't say that all carbs are bad, but I will say that there are some very bad carbs that do not serve a purpose in your life. Now, what are the best sources of carbohydrates? Vegetables. Vegetables. The reason why is that vegetables have a lot of fiber in them, so they're in very long chains of sugars. So they're a lot more difficult to break down, take longer to break down, and they're not absorbed as quickly in the intestines into the blood. So they're not going to spike that blood sugar and cause a massive insulin response. Just remember, you do need sugar in order to be able to survive, but the amount of sugar that you need is not as much as you think that it is. So yeah, you have to be able to start cutting out the sugar especially. And then the third thing is start handling stress, and the stress response is known as cortisol. So anytime you start seeing a dip in your blood sugar, you're going to get a spike of cortisol, which is going to start to mobilize sugars from your stored sugars in your liver and also a little bit in your muscles. And when that happens, it's going to try to bring your blood sugar back up. But I want you to know something, is that also is going to happen when you have any kind of mental stress. So yes, you can develop poor blood sugar control just by having a chronic mental response, a stress response all the time. And so anytime that happens, you have a stress response, cortisol starts to go up. It sends a signal to start mobilizing sugars to give you energy to be able to run away from the bear or the tiger or whatever stressor it actually is. So this is why when you talk about mental stress, that's why I always tell people, a great way to handle this is say this: is this worth stressing over? Is this actually putting my life in danger? And if it's not, then you got to stop stressing about it, because the more that happens, the more cortisol you're going to release, more your blood sugar is going up, the more you need an insulin response, and the more you are dousing your body with insulin to try to shuttle sugar back into those cells to be used as an energy that you're never using, because it really is not a true stress response that demands more blood sugar, okay? So you got to start handling all of those different things. Now, as we go into the holiday season, I want to show you an herb that I absolutely love. I don't know if you can see that very well just with the lighting, but it's called gymnema. So I'm going to give you a tip. One of the things that we do for people once they are type 2 diabetic or start to demonstrate poor blood sugar control is, yes, we do tell them to change their lifestyle, because that's the most important thing, but something that's really cool is known as gymnema. So gymnema actually will help. And in fact, this is what's so amazing is that, in the last 3 to 4 years, there is a lot of scientific research articles like you see right here, and they're looking into saying, hey, what is this Gymnema? What is it doing? And is it all that it is actually cracked up to be? And in fact, yes, it is. And in fact, the 2 top herbs when it comes to with blood sugar, and there's a lot of other things out, guys, that that we tell. So we're not just throwing some herbs at people, but things like golden seal actually has the same mechanism of action to metformin, okay, without the side effects. But another one is actually known as Gymnema, okay? So this is what's really cool. And in fact, heading into the holiday season, I'm like, if you plan on being sassy, you might have to be taking some Gymnema in order to try to keep those blood sugars down or slow the absorption of those sugars into your bloodstream, okay? So here's what's really cool. This is how Gymnema actually works. Here's the first thing that Gymnema does. I love this. If you have Gymnema, I want you to do this test. We're going to do it in our office coming up, probably on a day, and we're going to tell people to do this. First thing you do is you put some drops, maybe 8 drops of Gymnema on the tongue, hold it there, for about 30 seconds, and then swallow it. And then eat something with a high amount of sugar, which is going to make it sweet. And one of the things that it does is Gymnema will actually block the taste buds for sweet. And it will make everything taste like cardboard they're supposed to have a sweet taste, which is going to have a lot of sugar in it. So you'll actually, if you have Gymnema and you have a cookie, it will taste like cardboard, okay? So sometimes you just have to, you gotta just, have some hacks that'll help you to say no to sugars, especially for some people. But what it also does is Gymnema actually prevents the absorption of glucose in the blood, which then can reduce your blood sugar levels. The gymnemic acid is going to block the sugar receptors in the intestines, which will then prevent absorption of sugars in the intestines. So it's blocking the absorption of sugar through the intestines, which will reduce your blood sugar levels. Sorry, I just hit my mic. And then what it'll also do is, this is really important, especially for people whose pancreas has just absolutely gotten wrecked and they have a really poor ability to be able to produce insulin anymore, is that Gymnema actually helps to regenerate the beta cells, which are the cells in the pancreas that are producing the insulin. So if that can happen and you're doing this at the same time, that will help it to start to increase the secretion of insulin so that you can then start to lower your blood sugar without having to take any kind of exogenous insulin as well. So you can see that it helps to regenerate, regrow, but it also blocks the absorption of sugars, which is why we give it to a lot of people initially starting out, because while they're changing their lifestyle, the Gymnema actually helps it start to rebuild, regrow, repair, and just helps you to get to that end just a little bit faster. That's why I love Gymnema, and it's probably the most sold herb we have at our office during the holidays, because no matter what I tell people, they're going to be sassy anyway, all right? So here is my tip, guys. Here is my tip. So celebrate during the holidays, all right? Celebrate. Be okay with celebrating. Just do it smart. But I'm going to say this, okay? So don't let the holidays take 25% off of your lifespan. So just remember this. If you check out, you do whatever you want, you're spending 25% of your lifespan doing irreparable damage in some cases. And so don't spend 25%, because you think about it, you spend 25% trying to undoing everything. You're spending another 50% trying to get back to point A again, and then you may spend another 25% trying to go back, and you'll see by doing this, you're only getting better, getting worse, getting better, getting worse, getting better, getting worse. And that's why you look 10 years ahead and you really haven't made any kind of significant change as well. So don't let the holidays take 25% off your lifespan. This message is approved by Wilford Brimley, all right? So here's how we do it. Guys, number one, celebrate on the holiday only. What this means is this. If you are planning on celebrating, I prefer you can do it without having so much food, but if you are gonna do it, then celebrate on Thanksgiving. That's it. Celebrate on Christmas Eve and Christmas. That's it. Celebrate on New Year's Eve. That's it. So celebrate for the next, those 3 days, but don't turn it into 6, 7, 8 weeks of just cashing out, checking out, doing whatever you want to do, because guess what? Because come January 15th, when you decide to check back in, you're going to spend the next 6 months trying to repair all the damage that you did for the last 6 or the upcoming next 6, 7 weeks, things like that. Number two, don't cancel your gym membership. You know how many people cancel their gym membership because they say that they're going to be so busy during this time of year? Guys, you're only busy if you allow yourself to be busy. This comes down to understanding what your priorities are. What on earth are your priorities? If you know and you understand your priorities, it gives you the freedom to say no to doing things that aren't moving you forward and things that do not matter. Guys, do not cancel your gym membership. If you have that, you have the time. Number 3, you got to work on your stress. All right. So this is a time of year where people are so stressed, for a lot of different reasons. Okay. So this is a time where we tend to reflect. We tend to look on, our families. We tend to look on a lot of different things. And so it can be very emotional. It can be very stressful, but you got to make sure you're handling your stress. You got to make sure you're getting enough sleep. You're not dousing yourself with sugar. If you got a gym membership, getting to the gym, moving your body, but also make sure you're handling that mental component to type 2 diabetes, which is actually stress as well. This is why probably the second most purchased supplement during this time of year is called California Poppy, because yes, California Poppy will in fact block the stress response at the level of the pituitary gland so that it doesn't actually end up affecting the adrenal gland and releasing all kinds of cortisol as well. And then the last thing is Gymnema. Okay, so yes, maybe this will allow you to be able to celebrate on Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, Christmas, and New Year's. But if you have some Gymnema that's handy, at least it can block the absorption of some of those sugars so that they're not absorbed so quickly. So guys, hopefully that makes sense. It's up to you. You don't have to. You don't have to let the holidays completely obliterate your health. You don't have to let the holidays turn into, this 7 to 8 week binge of, celebrating people, but in reality, you're just celebrating your addictions, you're celebrating yourself. Remember who you're celebrating during this time. And just remember is that it's 100%, it's completely up to you. So let me know in the comments what your plan is for the holidays, what your plan is to make sure that you're working preemptively so you don't destroy your health. And let me know what your plan is moving forward. Is it a thumbs up for Gymnema? Is it a thumbs down? How are you going to be handling the stress? How are you going to be handling this whole plan of everyone going backwards, but you still moving forward? So again, guys, don't let the holidays take 25% off your lifespan. I hope that makes sense. And last thing that I want to go over is this. I didn't write it down, but I'm going to tell you, okay? So I have been working very hard, very diligently on coming up after Thanksgiving. We're going to be doing what's known as a 12 days of Christmas, the 12 days of Christmas. And during the week, for 12 straight days, we're going to be doing an awesome live video on some tips, things like that, things that you're going to find absolutely awesome, absolutely amazing. You're going to get tremendous value off of each one of these lives. And when you share, when you comment, when you do, and you interact with us at the very end of it, which I think is going to be December 18th, we are going to be doing a live video, and we're going to be drawing a bunch of winners, and we're going to be giving away over almost $2,000 worth of things for you. Yes, I said that right. $2,000 worth of things. So all you have to do, the only thing you have to do is get involved. That's all you have to do. You just have to share. You just have to comment. You can do it some other ways too, but I'll go over that leading a little bit closer, but stay tuned for that. That is going to be awesome. So during the month of December, we're going to be giving, because this is the time that we do it. And so I know that a lot of people are stressed. A lot of people, they just need some good news, and we're going to be the ones to hopefully brighten their day and give them a little bit of good news. So guys, I appreciate you. Thank you for joining me on this Monday. And I hope you guys have a great, great rest of your week. I always appreciate you watching, and make sure that you share this too. I always appreciate that as well. Guys, be well. We will talk to you very soon.